Hey guys, in today's video, we'll be talking about function calling or tool calling with LLMs. So let's get right into it. What is function calling? Function calling, according to me, is a misnomer, especially if you're a software engineer. You know that function calling is you actually calling a function. Well, with LLMs, function calling is slightly different. It's the ability for LLMs to choose a function and then return that as a response and not actually call the function. And so we'll see today how we can actually use function calling or an LLM's ability to choose a function so that we can work with external APIs. In today's video, I will be using a bare bones Node.js application, and we'll be using the free weather API to get some weather information based on some prompts. So switching really quick to my code editor, we have a bare bones Node.js application that I've set up. And I have a few things going here, so I'm going to give you a quick overview. We have a blank main.js file, but essentially we have the API calls out to the weather API. I will be using OpenMateo for weather information. And all of this code is going to be available on GitHub with a link available in the description down below. So we have some weather API calls going out and a bunch of tools, and we'll take a look at this a little later. So let's get right to it. The LLM that we're going to use is Grok's Llama 3.1 tool use. Each LLM kind of has different capabilities, but Llama 3.1 tool use actually does pretty well. So let's put in the Grok SDK so we can work with the Grok API and a prompt function that uses the Grok API. You'll see here that the model name is the Llama 3 Grok tool use. That takes a bunch of tool definitions and messages that we provided. Now, what is a tool and how do we define it? Right. So before we go ahead, I'm going to create a new file called tools. And these are going to be tool definitions that we're going to send off to the LLM. This is what a tool definition looks like. It's actually a pretty simple definition, and this structure is called JSON schema. Most LLMs accept tool definitions in this format, and this goes after the OpenAI specification for tool definitions. So you can see here, it's got the type of function and the definition of the function itself. The function has a name, get current weather. The description kind of describes what the function does, and the parameters to the function. The name of the function is very important because it allows the LLM to figure out when to use a given function. The better a function's name, the better is the performance of the LLM. The description, along with the name, allows the LLM to decide when, again, to use the function. Better description just means you'll get better performance with an LLM. Now that we have this tool, let's go ahead and actually see how this works. Going back to main.js, I'm going to paste in some messages here. I'm going to bring this chat completion message param from Grok SDK. So we'll see here we have two types of messages. We have a system message and a user message. If you're not familiar with these, you should go check out my previous video where I speak about using an API to speak with LLMs. And we go over briefly about these types of messages. So here we have a system message, which essentially is kind of a configuration of the LLM itself, and it tells the LLM to behave in a certain way. So we're saying you are a helpful assistant. You know how to effectively use tools. You have access to the following tools, and we attach them here via our API call. Use them when required to satisfy the user's requests. So that kind of just sets up the LLM to correctly respond to us. So you can see here that I put a user message with what is the weather in Bangalore. That's the city where I live. You can imagine that this comes in from a chat interface, perhaps an API call. On that note, if you're interested in learning about creating APIs with LLM functionality, please let me know, and I'll be happy to create videos. Now it's time to actually prompt the LLM. So let's say await prompt. We'll give it the messages, and we also need to provide the tools. So we're going to import those tools that we defined in our tools.ts. Looks like I forgot to export it. So let's export that out, and we'll import that back in here. So what this does is it makes an API call to Grok with the model name, the tools that we've chosen, which is the current weather API, and the messages, which is going to be the system message along with the user prompt saying what is the weather in Bangalore. I'm going to open up my terminal real quick. And if I run this, and I am using TSX, that's why you don't see a tsconfig file. TSX is an excellent tool for running TypeScript code without a lot of the boilerplate. So if I say source main TS, I have set up API keys, and that's in my env file. So clear that out. We'll try that again, and we'll specify an env file like so. I forgot to actually console log the response, so let's do that. And we'll run that command again and see what happens. So very interestingly, if you've seen my last video, you'll see that a response from an LLM usually has content within it with the response, like if you were to chat with it. But here we see that it actually gave me back a list of tools. And this is what tool calling is all about. So let's take a look. Tool calls is basically the tools that the LLM saw fit to choose in order to satisfy my response, my request. And it gave me an ID, which will come in handy in a bit. The type is function, and the function actually has a name of get current weather and the arguments to that name. So the LLM was able to figure out from my prompt that it has to use a certain tool and actually filled out the arguments for it. So how do we actually go ahead and get the response from this tool call? Well, that's up to us, the engineer, to actually do. So now that we have the message, let's pull out the tools that the LLM has chosen to use. Let's pull out the message from the response, and we have the AI response here. Once we have the response, we're going to go through it and we'll say if the response has tool calls, and we know that we do, it's an array greater than one. In kind of a real world setting, you probably want to iterate through all of these tools and then call them one by one. But today we're just going to use one tool. And so I'm going to pull out the first tool here, the tool calls of 0. Here you can see a reference to a tool map, and we need to define that. So what is a tool map? A tool map is a regular JavaScript map, which essentially maps the name of the function that we've defined in our tool definition back in tools.ts, get current weather, to the actual function call that makes the request out into an API. Maybe it's web search, maybe it's a SQL command, it doesn't really matter. This is the actual implementation. This is the name that the LLM knows about. You can see here that the name maps to this, and this is the actual function. So we pull out the first tool call, which is get weather map. We get its name, we find it in our map, and then we actually call the selected tool. And we'll see here that we are parsing the arguments. As you can see here, it's in JSON. So you can see here the get current weather in our tools directory fetches the coordinates from the city because the prompt has the city in it. And then it uses that information to get the weather information from the Meteo API here. So let's put all of this together and see what actually happens. Once we have the result from calling that tool, essentially calling get current weather, we are going to push this result back into the LLM or push this back into our messages array with a special type of message that the tool use model recognizes with a role of tool. It's got the content, which is the result of that tool call, our API call essentially, and the tool call ID. As you can see here, this maps to this. This is important in cases where an LLM makes multiple function calls or it makes nested function calls, and it needs to map back a response to a tool call. So we give back the tool call ID, we push that tool message back into the messages array, and we prompt the LLM again with the result. Finally, we get the result out from the call to the LLM. So I'm going to clear my screen here, and I'm going to call the LLM again, and let's see what the weather in Bangalore is like. So we have two console logs, obviously the one being the first we've already logged out here, but the second you see here is it says the current weather in Bangalore is 24.7 degrees. So my headphones decided to give out midway, and I was essentially just talking and not recording. So that's why the change. All right, so getting back. I've made a few changes to our little program, and I'm taking some parameters from the command line just to keep it a little more dynamic. I'm taking the format and the city from the command line, and we're giving it some sane defaults. And down here, you'll see that I'm using them in my prompt. So getting to the command line, let's actually run this again, and let's say, what is the temperature in Paris? And we won't give it a format, it'll just default to Celsius. The weather in Paris is 8.5 degrees Celsius. So let's see what it looks like in Fahrenheit. 47.3. So let's just do one last thing. I'd like to know what the weather's like in Delhi. It's usually pretty hot, and we use the Celsius system for measuring temperature. So 26 degrees. Wow, that's pretty hot. So you can see, folks, that it's actually pretty interesting that you can use tools to accomplish what you want just through natural language prompts. Now, before we end this video, I'd like to show you a leaderboard for models that are capable of function calling. There's quite a few. You're going to have varied mileage depending on the models that you use. But I've personally found a lot of good results from Claude 3.5 Sonnet. It does extremely well. I think Claude 3.5 is the best performing model for tool use. The GPT-4 family of models are also very good. I haven't personally tested them a lot, but they are pretty good. But I want to show you this leaderboard here. It's called the Berkeley Function Calling Leaderboard, or the Berkeley Tool Calling Leaderboard. And it's one of those leaderboards that people refer to, they've kind of come to a standard for referring for performance of tool calling models. So you can see here, Claude is up there, GPT-4, Gorilla, and a few others. Open Functions V2 by Gorilla is actually pretty good. I found I've got good mileage using Llama 3.1 tool use from Grok, so you should probably check that out. If you're a software engineer and not an AI ML expert, and would like to learn more about incorporating LLMs into your applications for business use cases or in your work, or you want to build an app, do let me know down in the comments. I'd love to create more content. I'm a software engineer myself, and I'd love to share my knowledge with you. If you are enjoying these videos and they have been valuable to you, I'd really appreciate a like on this video, a share, and even a subscribe so you don't miss out. Until next time.